On this dark chapter of Canadian history and the residential school system in Canada, we have connected with Nancy Dyson Rubenstein and Dan Rubenstein, and they're in Ompa, Ontario. That's about an hour west of Ottawa. Now, back in 1970, they worked with children at a former residential school on Vancouver Island called St. Michael's. They were fired after speaking up about the poor conditions there. They have subsequently released a book last year describing what they saw. It's called St. Michael's Residential School, Lament and Legacy. Nancy and Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So, Nancy and Dan, in the last several weeks, there's been a very painful conversation happening in this country about residential school systems. And you guys have a very unique connection to that history. What have the past few weeks been like for you?
Our book was released just as the first announcement came out about the unmarked graves in Kamloops. We were saddened, a visceral reaction to it, but we were not surprised. The conditions were there for children to disappear, and we had heard rumors to that effect when we were at St. Michael's.
Okay, guys, so let's talk about that. Let's go back to 1970. You're a young married couple from the United States. You're looking at Canada as this sweet, wonderful nation. I mean, I read some of your op-eds. You had such wonderful ideas about what Canada represented, and so you wanted to come here and work. And then you started working at the residential school. Tell me about what you saw.
The very first day, we saw 4 children delivered to the school. They were led into a sub-basement. The matron took the children and cut their hair and cut their clothing and took all of that and threw it into the firebox of the boiler. And the children were terrified. And then she pushed them into a shower and washed them with a very strong soap. And we said, "Is this necessary?" And she answered, "Lice. They come in with lice." She didn't see the bigger picture. She didn't see these little children who had been forcibly taken away from their family and their community.
And what was your understanding, Dan, of what you'd be doing at that school? Why did you want to work there?
Well, we needed a job to become landed immigrants, and I thought it would be something like a school. I mean, I had done substitute teaching before. I expected it would be a school, but it wasn't anything like a school. It was really more a warehouse to keep these children. There were no records. We never saw a class list of the children I was to take care of. I don't think it existed, something that had their names, the communities where they were from, their next of kin. This wasn't like anything that people back then or today can imagine.
And so you're seeing this. So Nancy, you described the first day. How long did you all work there?
I worked with teenage girls, and I very quickly realized I was totally overwhelmed, unprepared, and I just felt I wasn't effective. So I asked the administrator if he would find a replacement so I could quit and volunteer with the 25 little boys Dan was looking after. They were little boys from 5 to 8. They were missing their baby teeth, right? The front teeth had fallen out. They were just these sweet little boys, and I think they were a little bit more open and easier to connect with. The older children were very wary, with good reason. And then altogether, we worked there for what Dan worked on. We were there 4 months.
And what is amazing to me in those 4 months, when we went through the 4,000 pages of TRC reports, with the exception of witnessing sexual abuse, we saw it all. The kinds of experiences that are documented in the wonderful book, The Survivors Speak. We realized horrifically that our experience was representative of what happened in 130 schools across Canada.
For those who have not read the TRC report or are not familiar with it, what did you witness that was confirmed by that report?
There was harsh discipline for things like speaking their own language. There was suppression of Indian or Indigenous culture and traditions. There was very poor nutrition. There was lack of care, lack of respect, lack of love. The children had very little privacy They slept in large dormitories with 25, 30 cots to a room. The staffing was inadequate. The facility had very few play opportunities or sports opportunities. The children were poorly integrated into the public school. Medical care, dental care was scant, and there were no records. I found out one of the teenage girls had recently been released from a sanatorium, but I didn't know that until months after I'd started working with her.
The other
Sorry, Dan,
the other
please go
major
ahead.
thing is that all the children had been forcibly, 150,000 children had been forcibly separated from their parents. That's what we saw. That's what Nancy just described.
So when you were there, guys, so you thought you were going to be teachers and this was a regular school. You quickly realized that's not what it is. What did the administration tell you? What was their objective? Because there is this understanding it was to beat the Indian out of the child. That's what our understanding is. What did they tell you?
When we started, it was in the fall of 1970, so the federal government was in charge officially. The churches still had a very powerful influence. Many of the staff, the administrator, the headmaster, the matron, had been with the school when it was an Anglican institution. They still had a lot of powerful influence. And the children were going to the local public schools. So we were caregivers in the morning, after school, evenings, weekends. And we would look after the children, but there wasn't much structure. There really wasn't a very clear job description.
So, Dan, forgive me just for 1 second. If you are witnessing abuse, you're witnessing terrible treatment of human beings, very vulnerable young children. Did you all speak out? Did you try to love these children? Did you try to care for them? What did you do to make sure this abuse stopped?
We tried to care for the children, and I have to say there were other caregivers there who were thoroughly decent people that tried to do the best in a bad situation. We tried to be fair with the children, be kind. Some of the children we got to know, and after we had left the school, they came over to visit us on a nearby island. We tried to maintain a relationship. As Chief Robert Joseph, who became our spiritual kind of advisor and elder on this journey, he said, Dan, the only way you're going to live with yourself is you have to believe that one or two of these children, you touch them with your kindness, and in their darkest hours, maybe they'll keep going. He threw me a lifeline.
We did reach out to the Indigenous community to ask them to help us understand how did this school develop and why were the children from Alert Bay, the local community, in the school? It wasn't for children from remote areas. Some children were, but the majority of children were from the island, a small island. And there was a minister, a local minister, who was working with the Indigenous community, and they started a petition. And we went around because we were working inside the school, and we could say, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're experiencing. So we were very excited when this petition was circulated and was sent off to Ottawa, the Department of Indian Affairs. And in December, 3 men from Ottawa did come to visit the school, or the residents. And we were very excited. The first day, the administrator spent time with the men. And the second day, they asked to speak to staff without the administrator being present. They first, introduced themselves, and then they said, do any of you have any concerns about the operation of this facility? The other staff were silent, but Dan pulled a paper out of his pocket, and it was a list of concerns that had been drawn up with the Indigenous community and others, like the minister. And he started reading off, harsh discipline, lack of affection, inadequate staffing, on and on. And one of the other staff was furious, and he said, Dan and Nancy shouldn't be allowed to speak. They're not Canadian, they're not Christians, and they've only been here 4 months. Dan said, we've been here 4 months, but that was long enough to see what's going on, and it's called cultural genocide. And the next day, the administrator called us to his office. He was not harsh, he was kind to us. He said, it's always been a bad fit, you need to leave. And we certainly agreed with that, and we were rather relieved.
There's so much more I want to ask you, but we are running out of time, folks. So let me say this to you. This is a painful, painful story for so many people in this country. And I wonder, some will be asking, why didn't you speak up sooner? Why didn't you say something? Why weren't you sounding the alarm years ago, even after you left the school? And you see all the pain now. How do you interpret those critiques?
It's a good question, and we regret that we didn't. Part of it was we knew that the federal government was dismantling residential schools, and the particular residence we were at, St. Michael's, closed in 1974. We thought, the trauma is ending. And we didn't really realize the lasting tragic legacy and the intergenerational impact.
The other thing we didn't realize is the scale of what was going on. We knew what happened in one school. It wasn't until 2015, with the TRC reports, we realized that what we had witnessed had gone on for 150 years in 130 different schools. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that, frankly, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 60s probably, there just wasn't a conversation. Like, we were living in a remote area. We had no internet. We didn't have a phone. We were newcomers. Who do you tell? It was obvious that the federal government didn't want to hear it. It was obvious that the churches didn't want to hear it. The press wasn't talking about it. CBC and the other journalists were not on the story.
Very quickly, guys, if you could be in some way reunited with those young kids that you worked with back in 1970 for those 4 months, and we've been showing images of you, Nancy, with some of those children, what would you say to them today?
And I've thought about this, and that's why I reached out to Chief Joseph, because he went to the school and he would know the children. What I want to say is I am so sorry that school ever existed and that any child ever set foot in that school throughout its whole history. I am so sorry for the existence of that school and that you were in that school.
And likewise, I would say I'm sorry. And we did try to reach out to children. And sadly, many of the children we worked with were dead at a young age. And so when the unmarked graves were announced, we realized that there were many other children who survived physically the experience of being in the residential school, but their little souls were destroyed, and they died very young.
This is a very painful conversation for so many. It's clearly deeply painful for the two of you, and I think it takes a lot of guts to come out and talk about this stuff, and it's stuff that needs to be heard. So thank you so much for making time for us tonight.
Thank you for hearing us.
Thank you so much.
Nancy Dyson Rubenstein and Dan Rubenstein worked at a residential school on Vancouver Island in 1970. And just a reminder, folks, that the National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available to you at any time if you need some help and some support. The number's on your screen right now. It's staffed 24 hours a day.